Lena stared at her phone screen, the message burning into her chest like acid. I'm sorry, Lena. I can't do this anymore. I'm not ready for fatherhood. I've met someone else. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Mason, there was no call, no explanation, no face-to-face. Just those 4 lines. Cold, surgical. Sent at 3:17 a.m. She sat at the edge of her bed, the sheets still twisted from a restless night, her hand unconsciously cradling her barely there belly. 8 weeks. She hadn't even had the chance to tell him. She was going to wait for the next scan. She'd imagined his smile, imagined the crib they'd build, the names they'd argue over. Now, all she could imagine was emptiness. The city outside her window blinked awake. Glass towers reflected orange light. Car horns echoed through the haze. But inside her apartment, time stopped. Mason was everything the world celebrated. Young, handsome, brilliant. A millionaire before 30. The man who built an empire out of code and charisma. And the man who had just walked out on his wife with nothing but a text message and a vague excuse. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Shorter this time. I'll have my lawyer send over the paperwork. Please don't make this messy. She clutched the phone so hard it might have cracked. Her breath came shallow. Rage didn't rise, just disbelief. Mason always knew how to exit clean, how to step away, before the damage showed. But this wasn't just a breakup. It was abandonment, and the worst part? He didn't even know what he was leaving behind. She opened her nightstand drawer and pulled out the ultrasound photo. A grainy black and white print, dated 2 days ago. The technician had tilted the monitor and smiled strangely before speaking. Looks like 3 heartbeats, not 1. Triplets. Lena had stared at the screen in disbelief. She hadn't told anyone. Not yet. Not even Mason. She was still trying to process it herself. Now she knew she'd never tell him. She rose slowly, walked to the kitchen, and made tea with trembling hands. The steam rose into her face like a veil, hiding the wetness in her eyes. Not crying, just stunned. The doorbell rang. She flinched. It was the building concierge with a manila envelope. Inside, legal separation documents. Already signed by Mason. She didn't open them. Just set them aside. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and spread the word, and tell us where you're watching from. The woman he'd left her for? Probably younger. Probably shiny, unattached. Lena didn't even care. This wasn't about competition. It was about betrayal from someone who once said, "You make me feel human." Apparently, not human enough. She walked into the nursery room she hadn't finished painting yet. Soft mint walls, half-assembled crib in the corner. She placed the ultrasound photo on the dresser and looked around. That he wouldn't know this space. Would never rock a crying child to sleep here. Would never hear 3 tiny voices call him dad. And she wouldn't tell him, because Mason didn't deserve the kind of love that came next. Before the message. Before the silence. Before the ultrasound photo rested on the nursery dresser like a quiet rebellion. There were signs. Lena just hadn't wanted to see them. Mason had begun changing slowly, like autumn creeping into summer. He wasn't cruel, just absent. His eyes stopped meeting hers at breakfast. His phone, once face up on the kitchen counter, was now always turned over. Meetings ran longer. His tone grew cooler. He spoke more to his reflection than to his wife. "You've been so sensitive lately," he said once, when she asked if he'd be home for dinner. And when she said she missed how things used to be, he smiled, almost sadly. "You're imagining distance that isn't there." But she wasn't imagining it. The distance was real. That he began skipping her appointments. When she felt dizzy one evening and asked him to take her to urgent care, he offered to call an Uber instead. When she tried to talk to him about how she felt, scared, anxious, pregnant, he'd nod, then pivot the conversation to stress at work. Everything was always just business. What she didn't know then was that Callie had already started. Showing up. A model. Bright, barely 22. Full of praise, charm, and the kind of flattery that men like Mason mistook for admiration. Lena remembered meeting her briefly, months earlier, during a tech expo after-party. "She's just helping with a campaign," Mason had said. When he introduced her, that Callie's handshake had been delicate, her smile too wide. And then, after that night, Lena started noticing things. Lip gloss on a wine glass that wasn't hers, the faint smell of unfamiliar perfume on Mason's blazer, late-night texts that made him turn away. When she mentioned it, he rolled his eyes. You're being paranoid. You know how you get during hormonal shifts. Hormonal shifts. That's what he called her instincts. Even her own mind was weaponized against her. Slowly, her friends stopped calling, mostly because Mason had told her. They added stress. When her sister tried to visit, he suggested she cancel. You need calm right now, not noise, he said, while scrolling on his phone. By the time Lena realized how alone she felt, the isolation had already wrapped around her like fog. And through it all, Callie was there. Subtle, invisible, always. In the wings. Lena found a social media post later. Callie at the same hotel Mason claimed he was having a tech retreat. Same weekend. Same rooftop. She didn't cry then. Not for him. Not even for herself. But for the part of her that had once defended him. She realized, in retrospect, that Mason hadn't just left in a text message. He'd started leaving long ago. In every forgotten glance, every rewritten memory, every moment he made her question her worth. By the time the message came, Lena wasn't just abandoned. She had already been erased. The hallway to the ultrasound room smelled like lemon disinfectant and cold steel. Lena's footsteps echoed more loudly than they should have. The nurse at the counter smiled softly, too softly, as if aware that the woman sitting in the waiting room with swollen eyes and no ring on her finger was walking through fog. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. She hadn't even planned on showing up. But something had pulled her there that morning. Perhaps habit, perhaps instinct. First trimester scan, the technician confirmed, adjusting the screen as Lena lay back on the crinkling white paper. The cold jelly hit her stomach and she flinched slightly. The wand moved. The screen came to life. And then, sound. Not just one flicker of a heartbeat. Not 2.3. A rapid, overlapping thrum that filled the room and froze time. Lena stared at the monitor. Her voice cracked. Are you sure? The technician smiled. Gently, eyes still on the screen. 3 heartbeats. All strong. Lena blinked once. Then again, as though she could wish it into normalcy. But it was real. So real she felt it in her bones. The weight of the sound. The sudden understanding that she wasn't just growing a baby. She was carrying an entire constellation of life inside her. Point 3. Mason didn't even know about one, as she sat motionless in the clinic parking lot for over an hour after the appointment. Her hands were trembling, the photos tucked into her lap like forbidden treasure. The image of 3 tiny curled shapes, perfect, miraculous, overwhelming. And she was alone. She thought about calling someone. Her sister, her old roommate, even Mason, but the silence around her felt sacred. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to rage. She didn't even need to explain. This wasn't about revenge, or pride, or fear. It was about survival, about choosing to protect what was hers, even if no one else ever applauded her for it. When Lena finally started the car, her shoulders dropped. There were no tears now, just clarity, a sharp, unwavering resolve. Mason had made his choice. Now, she would make hers. She went home, opened her laptop, and created a document titled Plan. That evening, she called a midwife clinic in a quieter part of the state, somewhere coastal, private. Then she emailed her landlord about ending the lease early. She'd saved just enough from freelance writing work to start over. Barely, but enough. She sold the engagement ring the next day. Mason had given it to her on a balcony overlooking the Amalfi Coast. She remembered the way he'd smiled, kissed her hand, said, "We'll build an empire." Well, he could keep his empire. She had something stronger now. 3 heartbeats. Steady, silent, growing inside her like the beginning of a new world, and Mason would never hear them. Not because she was cruel, but because she had finally remembered who she was without him. And she refused to let her children grow up believing love should feel like erasure. It was the kind of place you only saw in watercolor paintings. White fences weathered by salt air, gulls crying overhead, and a horizon that seemed to stretch into forever. Lena stood barefoot on the porch of a modest 2-bedroom cottage, key in hand, 3 tiny onesies folded in the overnight bag by her feet. No one here knew her as Mrs. Mason Grant. They just knew her as Lena. The house smelled of cedar and ocean wind. A retired librarian 2 streets over had offered to help unpack. A florist down the lane brought sunflowers the second day. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't anything like the sleek, sterile penthouse she had left behind, but it was hers for the first few months, Everything moved in cycles, diaper changes, midnight cries, warming bottles by moonlight. She would wake with two babies on her chest, and the third snuggled in the crook of her knee, her heart both heavy and light. There were moments of collapse, of bone-deep exhaustion, of wondering what she had done, but there was never regret, not once. Every giggle that echoed through the small cottage, every step on the creaky floorboards, every breath of sea air while holding one boy on each hip and another strapped to her back. This was life now, real life, and slowly it began to rebuild her. She took freelance work again, quietly, under a pen name, writing late into the night after the boys slept. Her stories were never about pain. They were about strength hidden beneath stillness. Women who chose silence not out of weakness, but out of knowing when words no longer served them. Her neighbors never asked about the father, and she never offered. She didn't need the pity or the questions. What she needed was space. Safety. A place to show her sons that healing wasn't loud. It was steady. Intentional. The triplets grew quickly. By their second birthday, they were running barefoot through the surf, squealing as cold waves chased their toes. They had her eyes, her curls, and her stubbornness. They fought over toy trucks and begged for more jam on toast. Their laughter wrapped around her like armor. Mason never called, never wrote. She'd expected, once, that he might, that some hint of guilt or curiosity would pull him back. But 3 years passed, and the silence remained complete. She left his name off every birth certificate, because he hadn't just left them. He'd never shown up. And now, he had no place in their story to in the evenings. Lena would stand on the porch with a mug of tea, watching the horizon blur into twilight. She didn't feel like a woman scorned anymore. She felt like a fortress, quiet, solid, unmoved by the waves crashing below. And though Mason's world kept spinning somewhere out there, gleaming, unbothered, hers had taken root, deep, real, unbreakable. Lena hadn't thought about him in weeks. That morning, she was stirring oatmeal on the stove while one of the triplets insisted on wearing socks on his hands, and the other two fought over a wooden spoon. Chaos, yes, but peaceful chaos. Until her phone buzzed. She ignored it at first. But when it buzzed again and again, curiosity tugged. 3 missed messages, all from an old college friend she hadn't heard from in over a year. Have you seen this? He really used your name. Page 3, top article. Lena tapped open the link. The screen loaded slowly over weak coastal Wi-Fi, but when it did, the headline slapped the breath out of her. Mason Grant rebrands Empire. Luxury line Veloura launches at star-studded gala. Her hand trembled slightly as she scrolled. There he was, clean-shaven, in a sharp navy tux, his arm around a red-lipped actress Lena didn't recognize. They smiled beneath gold balloons and velvet banners. Veloura. She knew that name, because she had invented it. Back when they were still married, back when she was sketching designs and drafting ideas for a skincare line. Veloura had been a word she dreamed up late one night, curled on the couch beside Mason, who had nodded vaguely as she whispered her ideas into the quiet. It was meant to be hers, and now, it was everywhere, trademarked, sealed, launched, celebrated BYM. She dropped the spoon into the sink and wiped her hands on a towel with more force than necessary. The boys were still chattering, oblivious. But Lena felt something twist inside her, fury, grief, disbelief. Not just at the theft, but at the gall that he had built an empire with her silence. With the pieces of her he thought she wouldn't miss. And now, he was throwing a party to crown himself king of her ideas. She sat at the kitchen table, fingers flying across the keyboard. A quick trademark database search confirmed what she already knew. Mason had filed for rights 6 months ago, under a shell corporation. Her name was nowhere in the credits. Of course not. That was the genius of Mason Grant. Take, rebrand, erase. But this time, he'd made a mistake. Because Lena wasn't a ghost anymore, she still had every sketch, every prototype, every dated note in her old journals, the ones she packed before leaving him, the ones she kept locked in a wooden chest beneath her bed. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like running away from him. She felt ready to walk right through his front door, not screaming, not begging, just showing up, with the truth, and with the 3 little boys who shared his eyes, standing beside her like living proof that some things can't be buried. Lena had always believed in doing things quietly, But quiet didn't mean weak. It had been 2 days since the Velura headline. She hadn't told anyone, not even the neighbor who helped with the boys, or the old florist who still brought sunflowers every Saturday. She had simply gone to her bedroom, pulled out the wooden chest, and laid everything out on the bed. Sketches, notes, early prototypes, journal entries with dates, voice memos saved from a time when she still shared dreams with a man who had since turned them into trademarks. That it wasn't just betrayal anymore, that it was theft. Lena took a photo of a handwritten page titled Velura, touch like water, finish like silk, dated nearly 4 years ago. Then she found the card, tucked between the pages of an old planner, half forgotten. A contact from college. Ariel Cho, JD Partner Cho and Brennan LLP Corporate Litigation, Intellectual Property, Discrete Representation. Ariel had always been fierce. Back then, she'd been the only student who showed up to class in heels and a blazer. They'd shared late-night ramen, laughter over terrible boyfriends, and plans for their futures. Lena had lost touch after marrying Mason, but some friendships don't evaporate. They wait. Lena tapped the number into her phone and paused before pressing call. Then she did. Cho and Brennan, this is Casey speaking. Hi. Could I speak with Ariel Cho, please? Tell her it's Lena. Lena Wren. There was a long pause. Then another voice came through. Lena Wren as in. Velura Lena Wren. Lena smiled faintly. Guess the name stuck. An hour later, Ariel called her directly. Her voice was cool, clipped, until it wasn't. Tell me everything, she said, the steel already sharpening beneath her tone. Lena did. She told her about the NDA, the sudden abandonment, the triplets, the stolen brand name, the buried dreams, the evidence. There was silence on the other end when she finished. Then Ariel said, this isn't just a personal mess. This is corporate fraud, IP infringement, and reputational abuse. And he made one critical mistake. What's that? Lena asked. He forgot who you used to be before him. By the end of the call, Lena had a secure digital folder set up and a strategy session booked. Ariel didn't ask for payment up front. She didn't need to. She wanted to win. Not for revenge, for justice. That night, after putting the boys to bed, Lena sat alone at the kitchen table. The ocean wind pressed soft against the windows. In front of her sat a stack of neatly labeled documents, scanned and ready. The digital version had already been uploaded. She took a breath, pressed send. Across the city, in a sleek, glass-walled office, Ariel Cho received the files and opened them. Her eyes flicked across Lena's original sketches, Mason's trademark filings, and side-by-side product pitches. Then she picked up her phone. Start background, she said to her associate. And prep a courtesy letter to Mason Grant's legal team. A war had begun, but this wasn't the kind you fight with noise. This was the kind where every paper cut bleeds. The gala shimmered like a dream designed to distract from guilt. Gold light spilled from crystal chandeliers. Champagne flutes clinked beneath murmured conversations and camera flashes. Mason stood at the center, wrapped in tailored black velvet. His arm draped around Callie, his fiancée, his latest asset, his clean slate. Velura's launch was meant to be flawless, and then the doors opened. She didn't need to be announced. The moment Lena stepped into the ballroom, silence carved a path for her. A forest green gown flowed around her like a ripple of still water disturbed. Her hair swept over one shoulder in soft waves, and on each side of her, a small hand clutched her fingers. Three boys. Matching suits. Matching eyes. Mason's eyes. The music didn't stop. But the talking did. From the dais, Mason turned. For a breathless moment, he didn't move. He blinked, as if she might vanish, as if he had conjured her out of old guilt. Callie leaned toward him. Who was that? Mason didn't answer. Lena walked slowly, calmly, through the crowd. Guests parted. No words, just stares. The children moved with practiced grace, used to her rhythm. The oldest boy squeezed her hand once. She gave the faintest squeeze back. A single waiter stepped forward, hesitating. Ma'am, guest list. Lena met his eyes kindly. Tell Mr. Grant his past has arrived. He'll understand. Behind her, the three little heads looked up, curious but calm. She never rushed. She never had to. From across the ballroom, Mason descended the stage, pulling away from Callie's confused whisper. His jaw clenched, but his pace faltered. He hadn't expected her here. Not like this. Not so radiant. Not so untouchable. He stopped a few feet away. Lena. She didn't speak. She let the weight of her presence do what years of silence never could. Callie joined him, confused, trying to smile. Hi, I'm Callie. And you are? Lena tilted her head, her voice soft and steady. The woman your fiancé never quite finished with. Mason shifted. You weren't invited. You didn't need to invite me, Lena replied, finally. You branded this night with my work. I simply came to collect the credits. Gasps rippled. Behind her, a photographer paused, lifted a camera, and clicked point 3 children. A mother. A man who looked like all 3 and didn't speak. Ariel, watching from the bar in tailored navy silk, sipped her wine. She nodded to her associate. Send the press release, she said. The timing was perfect that Lena's story, sealed for years, would break tonight. And Mason's clean slate? It was about to be rewritten. Mason's hand closed around Lena's arm just as the murmurs in the ballroom reached their peak. We need to talk, he hissed, pulling her away from the crowd, past the velvet curtain behind the stage. His smile stayed fixed for the cameras, but his grip tightened. Lena didn't resist. She walked calmly beside him, the green silk of her gown brushing against the marble floor like waves lapping a cliff. He slammed the door of the private lounge. Behind them. What the hell are you doing here? She turned to him with an expression so measured it sliced deeper than rage. Protecting what's mine, she said, and from her clutch, she pulled a sealed envelope. Heavy paper. Silver seal. Consider this your formal introduction to the consequences. He stared at it, but didn't reach for it. What is this? A lawsuit, she said, placing it on the table between them. Intellectual property. Theft. NDA breach. And a formal paternity petition, signed, witnessed, and backed by legal precedent. His eyes narrowed. You're out of your mind. This is insane. No, she said quietly. What was insane was thinking you could erase me from your narrative and walk away clean. You didn't just leave me, Mason. You left them. As if on cue, from the ballroom beyond the curtains, one small voice cut through the hum of champagne and gossip. Mama? Mason froze. The door cracked open and one of the boys peeked through, his tiny bow tie slightly askew, clutching the edge of the velvet curtain. Mama, are you okay? The silence in the room dropped like a stone into still water. Lena turned to the boy, smiled softly, and opened her arms. He ran into them without hesitation. She knelt, smoothing his curls. I'm okay, sweetheart. Thank you for checking. From the doorway, a few heads peeked in. The child's voice had drawn attention. Too much. Mason moved fast to shut the door again. You're causing a scene. No, Mason, she said, standing again. I'm making a point. She held her son's hand and turned to go. Mason reached for her again, but she stepped just out of his reach. Do not touch me, she said calmly. You lost that right the day you hit send on that goodbye text. Lena, this is extortion. She raised an eyebrow. No, this is exposure. The boy tugged her hand. Can we go now? Yes, she said gently. Let's go find your brothers. She led him back through the door, through the hush of whispered speculation, past stunned faces. Mason stood alone in the lounge, the envelope untouched on the table, the future unraveling at the seams of his designer jacket. Outside, cameras waited. And so did consequences. Callie lingered near the velvet curtain, one hand still clutching her champagne glass. From where she stood, she hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but Mason's voice was impossible to ignore. You left them, Lena had said. Her voice calm, unshaken. Callie didn't hear every word, but she heard enough. Paternity petition. Lawsuit. Mama. She blinked hard, trying to keep her face composed. Around her, the party buzzed with the uneasy static of a story. Escaping its leash, someone brushed past her. She smiled reflexively, the rehearsed kind of smile that once came naturally. But tonight, it felt like paper stretched too thin. She slipped down a side hallway and into Mason's private office. She'd only been in here once, briefly, when he had her sign a non-disclosure form for the brand campaign. The room was clean, cold, chrome and glass, masculine and perfect. Like Mason's public persona, she walked to the desk and stared at his tablet, left half hidden under a leather folio. It blinked awake with a simple tap. No password. Habit. Arrogance. Callie hesitated, then tapped into the mail app. She searched the word pregnancy, dozens of results. Her stomach dropped. One email chain caught her eye, sent just weeks before the breakup. The subject line, she's claiming she's pregnant. Mason's reply was brief. Callous, ignore it. She'll figure it out. Callie sat down slowly. Page after page revealed what she hadn't wanted to believe. He had known. About Lena. About the babies. He hadn't left in confusion. He had abandoned them with full clarity and built a brand on the illusion of integrity. She felt something inside her twist and then uncoil. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Disgust. She rose without taking the tablet, without taking her clutch. Just walked straight out, back into the party, where the cameras were turning toward Lena. The children. The whispers had turned into headlines. Callie didn't pause to say goodbye. Not to Mason, not to the guests, not to the brand. She stepped into the elevator and pressed the button to descend. One hand on her chest, one hand on the railing. She closed her eyes and breathed for the first time in hours. In months, maybe, there would be no press conference. No statement. She'd just disappear, like Lena once had. But unlike Mason, she wouldn't pretend it never happened. Outside the gala, the air smelled like spring rain and news. Camera crews circled. Reporters barked questions into microphones. None were for Callie. She moved past them like a ghost, unnoticed. She reached the street, waved down a car, and whispered to herself before stepping in. He used us both. As the car pulled away, she didn't look back. Let Mason clean up his own mess. She was done posing for someone else's story. Mason's face was everywhere. But not the way he'd planned. It started as a trickle. A single tweet from a gossip columnist. That woman at Maddox's launch wasn't just an ex. She brought receipts and triplets. Within hours, the story ignited. Blogs speculated, podcasts debated, and news anchors posed questions with careful phrasing but raised eyebrows. Words like abandonment, IP theft, paternity, and fraud began, circling his name like flies around champagne. His publicist issued a statement that same night. Mr. Maddox has always prioritized integrity. We ask for privacy as we clarify recent misunderstandings. But there were too many contradictions to clean up. Too many receipts. Sponsors began to pull their logos from his campaign visuals. One by one, partnerships dried up. Luxury watch, brands, high-end fashion labels, even the wellness app he'd just endorsed. Lena, meanwhile, stayed silent. She didn't hire a PR firm. She didn't give interviews. She let the truth carry its own weight. Her legal team, led by the same college friend who once shared ramen and late-night study sessions, took every call, drafted every motion, and answered every media request with a single line. We will speak in court. Behind the scenes, Lena kept her routine simple. Mornings with the boys. Lunches with her neighbor, a retired professor who adored puzzles. Evenings reviewing evidence with the legal team from her sunlit dining room. But the world around her moved. Differently now. A journalist emailed, politely requesting her side of the story. Another left flowers on her porch with a note. We believe you. Lena read them, then threw them away. This wasn't about believing her. It was about holding someone accountable, no matter how expensive his suit or how curated his Instagram. Mason tried to fight back. Filed a counterclaim for defamation of character. Released a carefully edited video on social media, playing piano and speaking in soft tones. I've made mistakes, but I've always tried to do the right thing. The comments turned against him almost immediately. Where were you when your kids were born? Trying won't raise those boys. This is not accountability. It's PR. Lena's lawyers sent one final letter, a notice of evidence discovery and a demand for financial transparency dating back for years. The silence from Mason's team after that was deafening. One night, as Lena walked her boys home from the community park, one of them tugged her hand. Mama, are we famous now? He asked. She paused, kneeling to meet his eyes. No, baby, she said softly. Famous is loud. We're just being heard. He smiled and wrapped his arms around her neck. Behind her, a car slowed. A photographer's lens peeked from the window. Lena stood tall and waved. Not bitter, not scared, just finished pretending to be invisible. The DNA results arrived in a sealed envelope. Clinical, unimpeachable, final. Mason Maddox, 99.98% probability of paternity. Lena read it once, quietly, and slid the paper into a folder marked truth. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply stood still, The weight of what she'd always known finally given form on government paper. The next day, Mason's attorney requested a private mediation that he wanted to discuss options. A polite euphemism for settle quietly. Lena declined twice, but when they requested a third meeting, this time offering full back child support in exchange for joint public statements, she agreed. Not because she wanted their money, but because some things needed to be said aloud to his face. The conference room was sleek, soulless. Glass walls, cold water bottles, chairs too modern to be comfortable. Mason entered alone. No Callie, no cameras, just a navy suit and the weight of a scandal dragging behind him like a wet cloak. "You look good," he said, his voice tight. "I look like someone who raised 3 kids alone," Lena replied. "Funny what strength does." He tried to smile. It faltered. "I didn't." "No, you never told me." "You told me to disappear," she said. "You said you'd fallen in love with someone else. I figured the rest of your life was full." He glanced at the table. "I was scared." "So was I," she said. "And I didn't run." The lawyer slid papers across the table: custody proposals, financial breakdowns, a mutual non-disparagement clause. Lena didn't touch them. "You're not just a name on a certificate," she said quietly. "You're a man who walked away from 4 lives. Mine. And theirs." He opened his mouth, but the words never came. Lena stood. "My children don't need your money," she continued. "They need safety, consistency, truth. And they have all of that without you." She paused, then added, "This file goes to the court. I'm not signing anything that silences me." Mason's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked tired. Older. Smaller. As she reached the door, he asked, almost in a whisper, "Do they ask about me?" She turned back, her voice even. "No," she said. "But someday they might. And I'll tell them what's on record. Not rumor, not emotion, just what you did and what you didn't." Later that week, Lena met with her lawyer. The custody papers had been finalized. Sole legal and physical custody. No visitation. No surname listed. No father on file. The lawyer closed the folder and looked at her. "You know," she said, "most women would have taken the settlement." Lena sipped her tea. "I didn't want a settlement," she replied. "I wanted clarity." Outside the window, her boys played in the yard, racing toward the horizon with sticky hands and laughter that couldn't be bought or borrowed. No headlines followed that week. No gossip. Just peace. A name was erased from a birth certificate, and a mother's resolve took its place. The wind off the sea was softer now, less like a warning, more like a whisper of peace. Lena stood on the back porch of her small home, a mug of chamomile tea in her hand, watching her boys chase seagulls across the sand. The sky was smeared in orange and lilac, the kind of dusk that makes time feel suspended. It was over. The lawsuit had settled. Privately, quietly, finally. Mason had agreed to all terms without another word. No press conferences. No PR spin. Just silence and a check that would sit, untouched, in a college fund for 3 futures he had no part in. Lena never responded to the media requests. Not to the tabloid offers or the streaming platform that dangled a docuseries deal in her inbox. She didn't need a spotlight. She had her sons. Instead, she opened a notebook. The kind with soft paper and an ocean blue cover. She began writing. A story, not about lawsuits, betrayal, or fathers who vanished, but about 3 little bears who lived near the sea and a strong, kind mama who built them a home out of love and sandcastles. Her boys sat with her every afternoon as she read drafts aloud, their eyes wide, their questions funny and honest. "Why don't the bears have a papa?" "Because some stories start with missing pieces," she'd answer, "and still turn out whole." The book was published through a small press. No fanfare, no tours. Just a beautiful hardcover with watercolor pages and a quiet dedication printed on the inside leaf. "To the 3 little reasons I stayed strong." Months passed. Then a year. The town came to know them not as survivors of scandal, but as the family with laughter pouring from their windows and sand in their shoes. Lena opened a small bookstore near the pier, painted seafoam green, with a reading nook for children and a coffee shelf for tired parents. She named it Heartlines. Occasionally, someone would recognize her. A raised eyebrow, a whisper. But no one asked. Not directly. They respected her silence the way you respect someone who's been through fire and walked back out holding light. One evening, As the boys curled up under a blanket watching the tide roll in, Lena received a letter, not from Mason. From Callie.it. Was brief. I'm sorry. For staying when I knew better. For not asking questions. I left him. And I wish you peace. Your sons are lucky. You are extraordinary. Lena folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. She didn't reply. But for the first time, she believed the word extraordinary might be true. On the anniversary of the twins' birth, she walked them down to the shore. They held hands, sticky, sandy, giggling, and built a tower of stones. Not just 3.4. Lena looked at the stack. One stone for each child. The fourth for the version of herself who never gave up. She didn't just survive betrayal. She rewrote what it meant to win. And this win didn't come with a gavel or headlines or applause. It came with calm, with bedtime stories, with soft-spoken strength, because some victories are loud and others, like hers, are simply lived. Yendi.